Okay, so I am excited to bring you Advocacy 101. And this is the first part of us of basically two main trainings, and then following will be ongoing training to update those things. Um, and this is specifically tailored to our group, but I think that the skills involved are transferable to any sort of advocacy. And also, I have to give credit to where I got a lot of this information. I did learn things from working with Cal Voices and with Share and with um, I'm sorry. Um, my brain is just totally fried today. Okay. So anyways, I give credit to Campro for a lot of the outlines that were developed many years ago through working well together and through other trainings that they were funded for. And they sort of did an original outline. I took a lot of that and worked it in with some other stuff, working with the advocacy coordinator at Campro and other things. So I just want to give like a beginning overview and then we'll go deeper. So I'm going to try to fit this all in an hour. Okay, so what is going to be in here? So first we're going to talk about what is advocacy, because if you really think about it, there are a lot of different ways you could define it. We're going to talk about why it's important in peer support. Why is it part of, a lot of times considered part of peer support? And then what are some ways that you can plan on advocacy? How do you set it up? How do you plan for it? And then talk about some specific skills that you can develop. As I said, it's a sectioned training. So the first part is today, the part one, fundamentals, basic definitions, and then specifically how that pertains to us here in Butte County. Part two, I put a little bit of deeper issues, ethics, um, tips on public speaking and self-disclosure in advocacy, and then practice. I have some activities for the second section where we can actually put to use these things that we're learning. And then part three, as I said, is not really a specific one. It's an ongoing set of trainings that we're going to have just to keep our skills up, and me included in that. So, what is advocacy? There are different types of advocacy. And a lot of times when I say it, I often don't think about what other people are interpreting when I say that, because it can mean different things to different people. So I thought it was really important to start with that foundation and what we are talking about when we say advocacy in this alliance. So there's legislative advocacy. That's what I do on a state level and regional level. That can also be city and local. So that's advocating for policies, bills, making laws. There's patients' rights advocacy, which is really specific to following and upholding the laws that protect patients and protect clients and protect us as consumers of mental health. There's agency outreach. That's also a form of advocacy. Depending on your agency, it can be more in some agencies than others. It's, when you go out to represent that agency, it's an act of advocacy, because maybe what their mission and their goal is something that requires system change or some kind of persuasion. So that can be a form of advocacy. And there's also interpersonal, or person-to-person advocacy. A lot of times that's what peer supporters end up doing in sort of our roles, is we become that personal advocate for that person. We advocate with their doctors, we advocate for them, in a number of situations. That's the person-to-person, one-on-one advocacy. And then there's self-advocacy, right? There's the advocacy that I'm going to empower myself, and I'm going to stand up and say, you know what, I need this. I need these accommodations in my job. I need XYZ. That's self-advocacy. So if you really break it down, there's all these different layers of advocacy that there can exist. Campro's definition of advocacy in their advocacy training was asserting yourself to get yours or others' needs met. Straightforward. I looked in my Webster's dictionary that I keep on my desk. It's pleading of, in favor of, or supporting, vindicating, or recommending publicly. I like that because it adds another layer. Go ahead, Ron.
No, I just noticed one thing. It's if you take all the different types, if you turn it the upside down, you can say that's how a person goes through, started with himself and then go up the list.
Yes.
Was pretty clever, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, there's every level, and sometimes you can, sometimes it does take the building like that, right? You start
Yeah,
with learning to advocate for yourself and then for others. And then, yeah, I like that, Ron.
yeah. No, it was just an observation that it fits into each other. It's like a stair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be cool to put that in the form of a pyramid, starting with ourselves first.
Yeah,
That's a cool
yeah.
idea. Thank you, Ron. That's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Oh, I've
That's
done
definitely
something
something
good.
we can add.
Mhm.
Okay.
I'm the pyramid man.
Mhm.
So one thing that was brought to my attention through the Campro training, and I thought was really important to bring out, was there's a difference between an advocate and an activist. And I think that's a really important distinction because there's different goals and different techniques in whether you're an activist or an advocate, right? And sometimes that line can be blurred. So what's the difference? So an advocate, they support and encourage, right? They don't, whereas an activist may come in very insistent, very forceful. This needs to happen. We need to do this, right? Whereas an advocate, we're saying, here's the logic, here's what we think, here's our opinion, right? We're not saying this has to happen right now. Um, and it's a spectrum, right? You can be on the edge of either one of those, right? Advocacy is really in service to others. When you're advocating on behalf of someone or some agency. You're usually doing it not for yourself, but for a cause, for an organization. Whereas an activist, oftentimes it's very personal. It's like, I have a passion and I want to do this for me. Like, I want to advocate for this because it affects me and I want it to change right now. And it can be very more emotional base, right? For that. An advocate, it can be done as part of a job. Not to say that an activist couldn't be paid to be an activist, not to say that, but tends to be more if you're advocating, there's more of a different frame to it, to where it could be part of, like, you can work for behavioral health and you can advocate at the same time within your job. You can advocate within any job that you have. Whereas if you're an activist, that can be sort of a dangerous, right? If you're on the edge of pushing things, pushing the envelope. I've seen peers kind of turn into, slide into that activism and then lose their job because they pushed a little too far outside of their job. And there's a line there, right? There's a balance. That's why the scale's there, right? There's a balance between these two. Activism is usually done in off time. Like, you don't do it during work. I don't think your boss would say, yeah, go to a demonstration, right? Advocacy has more of a professionalism. There's a following of procedures and a respectfulness about it. Whereas sometimes activism can be more, demonstrations, lobbying, really, more in I'm not saying it in a negative way, but more in a volatile way, more of a dynamic way, right? Like, it's more highly heightened emotions, right? And then finally, the goals are different, right? The goal of advocacy is long-term effectiveness. It's relationship building. Whereas the goal of activism is immediate change right now. Like, we want this done. It needs to be done yesterday, right? I just wanted to point that out because it's easy to slip into an activist role especially the more involved you get. For this training, the focus will be on the local city and county advocacy. That's where CWHA kind of sits on that level. For this training, and this is something that I hope we can evolve and change as we go along, but I kind of worked up this definition and I'm more than happy to change it. But I'm thinking this will give us a place to start. So, supporting and recommending publicly the needs and priorities of mental health peers and consumers of Butte County. upholding and promoting the agreed upon values, interests, and goals of the Community Whole Health Alliance while representing the group at public venues. So that still needs definition, right? Because we've set up our mission and our value statement, but maybe we still need to put down what are our actual political policy goals, right? Maybe we need to define that more. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the one that you had before. They can go into each other.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say if you have a supervisor or a boss and you have a group, that can be activism, that they go together as a group.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So it's like you said, it's a balance there, and you do crossovers, but it's a fine balance to what you're going to do or not do.
Yep. Yep.
So that was all I had to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate them. I appreciate it. So our primary focus is two things, public meetings and outreach. So when we're representing our agency, what does that advocacy look like, and what does it look like at public meetings? So our sorry, my son came in. I'm like, wait, hold up. Okay, so other definitions to know. So some other things to think about, just to know that you really have a clearly defined for yourself or for this group. What is a peer support specialist? What is a stakeholder? And what is the recovery model? And I can go into all of those just briefly, but I think it's important to just touch on them. You know, peer support specialist, one of the things that I have advocated for is to really define peer support specialist as a specialty mental health service and a provider. And there is a definition in the new SB 803 law as well as to what that means. And then our county also has a job description for that. So it's something to look into and really see, what does that definition really mean? It's not just somebody with lived experience who has a job. It's a defined skill. Stakeholder, that can be us. That can be people that have, lived experience, who are, consumers or ex-consumers or would-be consumers of mental health services. But it's also anybody who has a stake in something. So anybody who has an effect of something. So law enforcement, they are a stakeholder of mental health. Community-based organizations, their leadership have a stake in mental health, so stakeholders are anybody that has a piece of that is affected by it.
That's a big group.
Yeah. So when I say stakeholders, I often mean consumers, but I have to check myself sometimes, because when I say that in a meeting, there can be all kinds of stakeholders that they identify as stakeholders. But if I'm saying that and I'm meeting consumers of mental health, I have to be really clear about that. And then also, not everybody understands what the recovery model is. I forget that as well. After doing this for a long time, I think everybody knows what that is, but they don't, right? So making sure that we have a clear understanding of the difference between the medical model and the recovery model of mental health care, and why we are behind a recovery model which supports peers in the recovery. And so I just want to turn it over to you guys. What are some other terms that you think we should know as advocates? Things that we should have a definition of in our minds?
I know for myself, stakeholder, when you started talking about stakeholders, I'm like thinking, am I going to drive a stake into the ground? What does it mean? And to me, it's still not really clearly defined for me. It's like when we do the steering committee meetings, and we're talking about stakeholders. I understand that I'm a stakeholder because I have mental health challenges, but I'm also trying to make it better. And still sit there and go, oh, when it comes to that word. I don't know, am I making sense?
So you would like another word instead of stakeholder?
Yeah. but I don't know what that's gonna be, so.
Well, don't we talk about recovery model when we talk about
Mhm.
the medical model, right? There's a contrast between medical model and the recovery model,
Mm-hmm.
where medical model is more, I don't know, step in somebody.
Go ahead, Natalie. She raised her hand.
Yeah, I agree that there needs to be a distinction between the differences between the medical model and the recovery model. But
Mhm.
other definitions I think we need to know are what is it called? The Lateran. Oh, I had it a minute
Oh,
ago.
the Lanterman-Petrus Short Act.
Yes, the LPS law that everybody keeps talking about. We should know what that law contains. We should know the background and the history, and we should know where CWHA stands on that act, what we like about it and what we don't like about it.
Good point.
I found some different words when it comes to stakeholder, what they have instead. If you hold on 1 second, I will read them. Collaborator, colleague, partner, shareholder, associate, contributor, participant, team member. That's the one that they mentions. A stakeholder is a party that has an interest in a company and can either affect or be affected by the business. The primary stakeholders in a typical corporation are its investors, employees, customers, and suppliers.
Right.
That's what they say.
And I think it's important to know that because when the reason why that particular word is one that I chose is because that's what's in the Mental Health Services Act. We're
Yeah,
identified as
that word.
stakeholders.
Yeah,
So we have to know how to interpret that for people that don't know what that means, right? We have to be able to know it well enough to be able to say whether or not we are a stakeholder, whether or not someone else is a stakeholder. We need to be able to define that for people. Yeah, thank you, Ron, for that, and thank you, Natalie. That the LPS law is crucial that we know what that's about. I mean, that's was a result in part of the peer movement.
yeah. So it
So
will be anyone that has some interest
mhm,
in that area, and it could be anything.
right.
Anything from investor to somebody that works with mental health. It's everything.
Right. So when the law says we need meaningful stakeholder input, that means everyone who is involved with mental health has a right to have input in
Yes.
that, right?
Yeah. So it's a big group of people
It is. It is.
with the same goal in a way.
Yeah, different perspectives, but they all should be heard according to the law, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to just start with sort of those definitions of like what is it we're talking about, right? When we hear all these words in meetings, we should define them for ourselves, make sure we understand them. So the importance of
Just
advocacy.
really quickly, there's just, I'm sorry, I was a little slow on the button. There's one other component that goes along with the LPS for the Lanterman-Petrus Short, and that's the Short-Doyle Act, which is actually more specific to funding and use of Medicare funding. So those kind of go hand in hand. And as we move into Medi-Cal billing, that's Medicaid money. We'll be concerned with that. So we want to know about that.
Yeah, good point. And maybe one of these advocacy meetings, we could delve into what those are, what the LPS law is, what the Short-Doyle Act is. I think that would be really valuable. So the importance of advocacy specifically in peer support, there's a debate among peer supporters as to whether or not advocacy is a core value or part of being a peer supporter. Because the argument is, well, not all peer supporters are advocates, But so that's something to think about. But if it's okay, I'd like to show you a just short video. Some of you probably have seen this. It's Sally Zinman talking about advocacy. Let's see. Can you guys see that?
Quote from Margaret Mead.
Let me make sure that the sound is right. Hold on.
Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That the story that I tell, it's about the consumer peer movement and the huge advocacy changes that we've made, but it's about any group's advocacy. It's about the advocacy of any group that feels marginalized and left out, and that their voice isn't heard. And it's the people who have been affected by the oppression, who have been marginalized, that have to lead it. It's not going to happen without those people. So every time you take the public mic, you've got your 2 or 3 little minutes, it does make a difference. And the advocacy does make a difference. It's, you know, it's the only thing that ever has. And it's
Okay. Could you guys hear that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. Not sure why it's doing that, but okay. Let me try again.
Was I the only one who got kicked out?
Yes.
Okay. No surprise.
The forces are conspiring against you.
With the way that my day go, I'm not surprised at all.
Okay, so I don't know why every time I go to share screen, it won't let me see you guys anymore. It was let me before, so we'll have to wing it. So if you guys raise your hand, just shout out, because I can't see you anymore. So so anyways, so advocacy has been a part of the peer movement from the start, because in the beginning, they were on the outside. They had to advocate just to even be a part and to make a difference, and because of what they did, that's why we are able to do what we are doing today. That peers, that we can even say peer support specialists is a job, because of what they started out in campgrounds talking about. We want to see the system change, and it should be nothing about us without us. They wanted to be that change, you know. They wanted to see the system different than it was. In fact, in the beginning, they didn't want any part of the system. They wanted a new system. And really, peer support saves lives, and you know, it sends the message that, you know, people can and do recover. And so, without advocacy, that message might not get out. So things, I'm just going to briefly go through these. You can go back and look at them on your own. Things to understand before you start. Again, talking about the recovery model, knowing what that's about is really helpful if you look at the 10 guiding principles of recovery. Even if you don't read the whole document, but you understand what this wheel means, it means that there's more than one aspect to being well, right?
Right.
It's really important to understand that, you know, and I think all of us do, but maybe when you're starting out in advocacy, you know, you're really strong and maybe addressing trauma, but then you kind of ignore other parts of it. But we have to constantly be cognizant that there's more than one way to be well. There's lots of ways that work together. And then along with that is there's a peer support code of ethics and core values. That's really important. If we're going to be representing peer support specialists, we need to have a working knowledge of that. We need to understand what that is, where it came from, and the basics of it. Now, I know all of the elements of it? Could I recite them? No, but I know where to find them, and I can study them and look at them, and that's all that I'm saying, is that you have to know they're out there and understand that as a peer support specialist, you're going to be expected to follow that code of ethics.
Mhm.
If you're representing our group, our Community Whole Health Alliance, you should be familiar with our 4 pillars in our strategic plan. I mean, as a basic working knowledge of where we're going, what we want to do. And you should know that the basic elements of our grant, and not that you have to know the budget or, what it says in the fiscal agent contract, but you should know the sort of the rough time frame and the big milestones that we expect to accomplish. And then, shared beliefs of the group and purpose. And I hope to work more on that with you guys so that we have something written that says all of that. Other things to understand, we've mentioned it already, the Mental Health Services Act, a landmark piece of legislation in California that really changed everything we're doing and made it possible for more peers to have jobs. And a big part of that is the community planning process, because the act calls for that meaningful stakeholder involvement. So it's very crucial that you know what the MHSA or the Mental Health Services Act is, if only just to know that it's a millionaire tax that funds a third of behavioral health. I mean, just that alone is important to know.
Mhm.
The role of the board or commission or agency that you're going to, you got to know what their job is in order to ask them to do something, because you don't want to go in there and ask them to do something that's not in their scope. You're wasting their time and your time. So just understanding what the purpose of a board is. Understanding what the board of supervisors job is, what is their role, and we can go through that. Maybe that's another advocacy training, as we talk about each of those and what their job is, what their scope of their duties and what their limitations are. Knowing, basically, you don't have to know everyone's names, but knowing who the leaders and the big players in the meetings are, knowing who the chair of the board is really important. Knowing who the secretary is really important, so that you can give them your written comments, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So just knowing, the function of some of the big players in the room is super important. If you know more, even better. And as far as meetings, there is a template that I have that I can share with you guys, where you would outline every meeting and you would put what times and locations they are, how to give input at those meetings, the procedures, and then just a little bit about the notes of the culture of the meeting. Is this a really conservative group of leaders? Because that might change how you come in and you speak before them. Are they really rigid about rules and time? Then you got to show up and be there right when it's time and be ready. You should anyway, but if the culture of the meeting is they're always going to be 45 minutes late, then you don't waste your time being exactly on time, knowing that might happen. So in our county, here's some of the meetings that you can be aware of: a board of supervisors, behavioral health advisory board. Sage mentioned the MHSA steering committee, the quality improvement committee, the cultural competency meetings, and I may have the name of that one wrong. I'd have to look it up. But the performance improvement projects, I bet a lot of us, I didn't know until a couple years ago that those even existed, and some of them are fairly new. So it's good to know. And also city councils. We do have a volunteer right now who's going and finding out when all the city councils are and creating a spreadsheet for us. So it's going to be really important as we get out into these more rural areas that we have a grasp on the cities and who their leadership is. So I'll open it up to you guys again. Are there others that we might know of?
Go ahead, Ron.
No, I just wanted to, that has nothing to do with this. It has to do with two backs, the definitions, the different ones. I think we should have one of those circles up on the wall so anybody that comes in can see it right away.
Mm.
And that will also be a little cheating plan for ourselves when we forget
Mhm.
all of them or some of them, that we can take a quick look and say this, and or we can refer to that on the wall. I think that's a very good idea to
Mhm.
come from me.
Thank you.
Office,
Like it.
office decorations.
Yep.
Yeah. No, but it's one of the people that come in can see it right away. I think it would be helpful for everybody.
Yeah.
I
And
have,
go ahead.
I have another meeting we could be involved in, and that is with the NAMI chapter here in Butte County. I know that a lot of parents and caregivers have a voice in that group, but they also value the peer voice, and there isn't very many peer voices there right now.
They are holding meetings.
I don't know if their meetings are online or what they are.
They're
We-
online. I get an
Yeah.
email from them.
Yeah, so we could also be a presence there. And the other meetings that we could be involved in are some of the ones that Laura brings to our attention, like the housing meetings and things, because that is part of the whole health alliance that we
Yeah.
stand for, right?
Mhm.
So any meeting that talks about basic human needs, it doesn't always have to just be around behavioral health. And I think sometimes we forget that. And when we stay in the meetings that are all behavioral health oriented, we're not doing our job in letting the rest of the community know how peers feel. You know, the rest of the community is relying on what behavioral health board says, unless there's another group out there who is giving them facts and information and talking from a lived experience perspective.
I just remembered one too. The Interfaith Council is it's the group of all the faiths in Chico, and they have their meetings too as well.
Excellent. Excellent. So we should, I wrote those down and I'll add them to our list.
I would just like to toss this out for thought because it's something that I haven't really defined for myself, but as I think about it all the time, when my broad definition of stakeholders, I see that anyone interested in a healthy community is really a stakeholder in that sense. They have an interest in a well-functioning community and in people being well. So I always wonder if there is a part in this whole equation for community service groups like Rotary or Kiwanis, because they are people who really get things done in a big way. And anyway, that's always in the back of my mind.
Right. Well, you know, you guys bring up the whole point. I mean, we chose to put the word community in our title because we want to be part of the whole community, the whole health, you know. And so if we're going to live up to our dream and our aspiration of being that community, we do have to step outside of our behavioral health walls. You know, we have to go out into those service-based communities and really be a, you know, community whole health alliance to really live up to our name. I think that's great.
I like that. And I also hope at some point that the medical model and the behavior health model will converge at some point. Because really, if your mental health isn't right, neither is your physical, or vice versa. You know, they yin yang thing again, you know? So that's my thought.
Well, people are generally coming around, and this will be brief, and the medical profession is slow to come to it, but the understanding of the whole mind, body, and environment as being inseparable, the
Mhm.
biopsychosocial model is starting to gain more traction.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite books, the body keeps the score, talks about that.
Yeah.
Our mind and our body are one and the same in a lot of ways. Okay, so this is just a little thing that I like. I like acronyms. I know you don't like them, Kevin, but I love they help me remember things because I'm a visual person and I can visualize letters better than I can phrases. So POP, this is from my collaborative governance teacher, who's the Marin County Director of Mental Health. And one of his things, and it's more explained in the literature he provided, but he always asks, what is your POP? What's your POP? And what he means is, what is your purpose? Like, why are you doing this? What outcomes are you trying to come about? Like, what do you want to see happen?
Mhm.
And what is your process for that? So what is your POP? So this is just something to get your mind going. Like before you step into a meeting, remind yourself, what is my purpose? What am I trying to achieve? And how am I trying to achieve it? Just to check yourself. It is really helpful to kind of ground you into that thing. I think it's helpful.
No, it's
Andrea?
wonderfully helpful, and I don't, not totally averse to acronyms. It's just my pet peeve. It's so stylish. But I would say that your POP is a wonderful model for any communication that you
Yeah.
have in mind, whether it be a phone call, a conversation, or a letter.
Yeah,
That's wonderful stuff there.
right. Natalie?
When you say, what is your POP? I would like to remind people that when you're at a meeting representing CWHA, it isn't what is your POP.
No.
It is what is CWHA's POP.
Yeah.
CWHA's purpose, what outcomes does CWHA want to see, and what process is CWHA recommending? Because we can't muddy the ground there. If you're representing CWHA, it has to be what is CWHA's POP, not your POP.
Great point. Absolutely. Yes. And it's good to remind yourself of that at the same time because, you could be slipping into your POP and then going, wait, I'm not here for this one. Right.
Then it becomes an extra O in there.
Right. And you may slip into that activist versus advocate role, right?
Yep.
I'm reminded of something that I learned in following up on Natalie in a negotiation training 30 years ago. And at first it sounds a little harsh, but it's grounds for far-reaching speculation. And the question was, what's the first rule of any negotiation? And people go, well, to get to yes, yes, collaboration, but no, the first rule of any negotiation is shut up. And so as we go out to advocate, let's remember that and remember what our POP is then.
Mhm.
I think when it's done, both parts should be happy what they receive.
Well, I think the point though is it's more important to listen
Yeah.
rather than just going in blazing guns. And so I think focusing on CWHA POP really sets up for success on that.
Yeah, listen is very important.
This is the Campro version of sort of like that of this idea of being strengths based, and when you are at a meeting, thinking in terms of it acknowledging what the strengths are and modeling the hope, right? So starting with the strength, like I'm really glad to hear that. I'm really glad to hear that, Scott Kennelly, you really want to focus on peer support, right? Like, I'm really glad to hear that. Let's start with that strength, right? And then polish, you offer ideas and solutions. I always say, come with the solution. Don't come to complain, come with a solution, because nobody wants to hear just rant, rant, rant and no outcome, right? Think of those outcomes. And then praise, sum it up with the positive. You end with the positive, because I've always been told too, people remember the first and the last things you say the most. So if you end positive, they, you know, that leaves that relationship building on the table.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and that's totally at the heart of a peer interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, for every complaint you have, you should have something instead of the complaint. That if you don't like this, can we do it like that instead?
Yeah.
That the strengths-based approach is fabulous.
ABCs of advocacy.
So this is how the Campro defined the basics of planning for advocacy. So starting with defining the problem. So really understanding what it is that you're looking at, like what is the actual thing. So some questions you could ask, or you know, like what is, it's going back to the purpose outcomes process, but it's like really understanding what it is you're addressing. You know, is this something that has been brought up at other meetings? Is this something that, you know, that they've already been talking about, and you come in fresh faced and you don't know that, you're going to look like a fool. You know, you come in talking about something that they just spent 45 minutes at the last meeting talking about, they're going to look at you like you don't know what you're saying, because you really don't. You know, so define your problem. Make sure you understand what it is you're addressing. If you're talking about something in MHSA, you should know what part of MHSA you're talking about and how it works in with what you're talking about. So that goes into the second part. Do your research. You know, if you don't know, ask, you know, find out. Don't come into the meeting expecting to comment on an issue that you know nothing about. Like, you don't have to be an expert, but you got to know at least what you're talking about. Like, in your solution, you know, you got to think about it, think it through. Watch your emotional temperature. That's what we've been talking about too. You know, where are you at? Check in with yourself. Are you in a place? I'm guilty of this one. I'm failing on this one. Ask Sage. At the last Board of Supervisors meeting, when we were there, I came in all excited because I was going to be a strengths-based, positive, hopeful person, and praise the Board of Supervisors for reading the proclamation on Global Peer Support Celebration Day. But guess what? They didn't have comment on that. So then I sat there waiting for comment, and Scott Kennelly got up and started talking about changing the LPS law and why they need to get more hospital beds. And my emotional temperature went really high, really fast. And I got up and commented on stuff that I wasn't prepared to comment on. And I felt really foolish. So it's even if you've been doing it a long time, it still happens. And so it's really important. And if you have someone with you, just for them to say, hey, and I've made a deal with Sage, if she's with me, to remind me to check my emotional temperature before I go up to that podium. And then brainstorm solutions with other people, you know, like I said, really think it through, and then decide on an action plan. Like, what is your process that you want them to do? What is it that you want to happen? Familiar faces. The next two slides are just some tips I got again from my collaboration texts. Of this one is called the Bridging Differences Playbook. It's really something I'd love to share with you guys. It's a workbook on building positive relationships with people and really skills to do that. So some of the things that it says in the beginning is, you know, it's about promoting positive dialogue, seeking to understand, not just change minds. And that goes back to what you were talking about, Kevin, of shutting up and listening, right? Because you don't go into a discussion with the intention to change their mind. You go in with the intention to understand it, right? And over time, and then it talks about your skills change with new information and practices. So you have to be flexible and understand that this thing that you've been working on, maybe it needs to adjust. Maybe you need to think about how that might adapt or change. Flex and practice your skills. That's why I really think that the third piece of this advocacy training is ongoing practice and skills. And then mistakes are expected but considered opportunities to learn. And then skills learned, they might be useful sometimes, but not at other times. So you have to be able to judge and understand what reason you're using that skill and if it's appropriate. And then, we always talk about this, the us them philosophy, like avoid using that and understand that we all have a common humanity. What's our vision statement? A community where all fit and embrace humanity. All. So
All
there's
of
no
us.
us, them, right? It's
Nope.
us, all
Us.
of us. We're all one, right? And then accepting that you don't have all the information and the answers, right? I was telling somebody recently, they were really worked up about having to do a presentation, and they're like, what if they ask me da 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 da? And I said, well, then you say, I don't know. And that's okay. You say, that's not something that I know. I don't have the answer. You don't have to have the answers. It's okay to say, I'm working on it. It's okay to say, I'm not sure, but I could find out. That's not going to make you look bad. What looks bad is if you try to answer something that you don't know, right? You don't want to do that. So be okay with that. And then things happen incrementally and in small shifts. So like acknowledge and accept when there's little wins. You're not always going to get everything that you set out for, but maybe you get some of it. And that's okay, because that's kind of how systems work. They don't change like that really fast, And that's where the advocate versus activist, where it's small incremental changes.
Yeah.
Risk, vulnerability, and sorry, was someone going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, aim for the stars, but be happy if you just reach the treetops.
Right? I like it. Yeah, exactly. And every little bit is closer than you were before. So
Yeah.
yeah. Risk, vulnerability, allow yourself to be challenged or changed. Maybe you really feel passionately about something, but you go to a meeting and you hear something that kind of makes you rethink it. Be willing to say, you know what? Maybe I need a change of my opinion. Maybe I need to rethink things. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you were wrong. It doesn't mean that you have to change, but be willing to consider alternatives. And also it's important to note that advocacy isn't for everybody. It really isn't. You have to be in the right, not the right, you have to be in a place where you can manage yourself and manage those emotional temperatures. You have to be in a healthy place. If you are struggling with something and you can't even, like deal with, like, say I'm in a really depressed state and I can't even get up to shower. Should I really be going on the behavioral health board meeting and getting on, and just talking about how I'm feeling? I mean, like, you have to be in a place where you can do all these steps, right, to plan and be in a professional state of mind. So again, I didn't know that was the next slide, but professionalism. This is something that, I always balked at, right? Because I was from the small town and I my bias was against yuppies and professionals and businessmen. And I was just like, nah, I can wear ripped sweatpants and I can do what I want. And I don't need nobody telling me to be professional. Well, as I've grown, I realize that there's an element of you dress for the job you want to have. You dress for the environment you're wanting to be in. And so I think that goes not just for clothing, obviously, but in the way we present ourselves, right? If we show up and we're unkempt and we show no sign that we care about ourselves, then people may interpret that as they don't need to care about us, right? There's a lot to that, but I won't go into it. But so when we show up at a meeting, how do we show that we're professional? We show up on time or early. Go ahead, Sage.
And it's really important to dress for success. You don't have to go in a suit, but please just make sure your hair is right, and clean clothes helps. I know we live in a rural county, but you see the council people up there, they got on their best studs. It's because they're there to do business. And the more professional we look when we go through the door, okay, you can wear slacks and a t-shirt, but just make sure they're appropriate, you know? We don't need anything that says kiss my on it or, talking about marijuana. Because those things people do, they don't realize that that's dressing for success and getting people to listen to you.
Right.
That's part of it.
Right.
No, the only time you can dress differently if it feels a purpose that you're
Right.
going to talk about something, then
Exactly.
you can dress up in dirty clothes and not shower for a week. If it has a purpose, it can actually has a purpose,
Yeah.
but generally not. Generally not.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I'm realizing that we're running low on time. So if I don't get to all these, we can push them off till next time, but I will try to do my best in the next 5 minutes.
Okay.
So, regularly showing up, if you sign up to be on a board, go to the meetings. I've seen it happen with peers and with others, but I've seen a lot of peers, and I'm all excited that we have a peer on this board or this committee, and then they stop showing up and they don't say anything and they just quit coming, and it's like, that just looks bad on all of us. So show up, especially if you're on the board or commission or anything, and follow through. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Show that you're professional. Understand the mechanisms of the meeting. Know what it means, know what public comment is, know what an agenda item is, know the basics of Robert's Rules of Order. You don't have to study the book, but know the basics. And then here's what you were talking about too, Kevin. Wait, why am I talking? Being intentional and thoughtful about what you say. And Kevin, you role model that really well, I think. I think out of everyone I've seen in our group, I think you role model that really well. I think, I tend to not do that too much. And I really admire people that are really, really intentional with their words.
Thank you.
But yeah. And just restraint, and where am I at? Am I reacting because I feel emotionally about this, or am I reacting because I have a legitimate reason and I have a solution that could fix this, or I think it could fix it? Okay. So the next few, let's see. I probably won't have time to go into all these, but maybe I'll do my best. I'll just try to rush, and we can go back and revisit it at the beginning of next time. So coming up with an action plan, this again's from Campro, this part. Identify allies and supporters, know your audience, prepare, research the issue and the solutions. We talked about that. The agendas for the Brown Act usually have to come out within, I think, 2 days before the meeting. So usually 3 days before the meeting, you'll see the agenda. Look at the agenda, look at the accompanying materials, know what they're going to be talking about, so you know where you're at in the meeting, and how the temperature in the room might be. If there's a really spicy issue on the agenda, you want to know that, right? You want to know what you're walking into. Be aware of the Brown Act. I do have some brief little brochures if you're interested. It'll show you the basics of what's in the Brown Act. Okay, so we'll put that in there, and then remind yourself of the purpose and value of stakeholder input in public meetings. They want you to talk. That's why you're built in. That's why there's public comment. So you're wanted, you're needed. Just do it in the way that it's, expected, and it will be appreciated. So you're valuable, Let's see. Collaborate with others. We can talk, this will be the focus next time, so I won't go into detail about this now. But before the meeting, like if our group's going to present something, we need to plan it. We need to get together beforehand. We need to have a whole meeting. We need to divide up our topics so we're not all saying the same thing. And we need to practice and give each other feedback. We need to practice our timing. At that same Board of Supervisors meeting, Sage was awesome because she did that. She wrote it out ahead of time. She practiced her timing. So even though it wasn't public comment for the one we had intended to do, she still got up there and was well rehearsed and got it done in front of the Board of Supervisors. And that was because of this. Let's see. I think I might skip public comment because it's 8 o'clock. I do have some basic stuff about like the structure of public comment and other notes of things that we can talk about, but I don't want to get into it because it's 8 o'clock and I don't want to keep you guys. It's already really late. So that's it for today.